Good morning, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us on this very important topic, artificial intelligence, AI, as we've all been hearing about, and I'm sure we all need information and have a better understanding of it. You've been through some instructions with our IT, Brendan. So I would just like to start by thanking our funders. And first of all, Secrétariat aux Relations avec les Québécoises d'Expression Anglaise for the funding that has allowed us to produce these webinars. And we'd also like to thank a partner that works with us on an ongoing basis, ACTLab, for their support with this project. I also want to acknowledge that in order to bring all these experts together, I've had a tremendous amount of help. When I first mentioned to Dr. Sawchuk, Kim, that I would like to do a webinar on artificial intelligence, I said, I have no idea where to start. And she so graciously stepped right up and said, Ruth, I can help you with this. So all the panel of experts that you're hearing from today is a direct result of Kim's initiative and has made it possible that we have such great people. So I also want to acknowledge that we're so fortunate to have Dr. Sawchuk and the panel of experts with the help from Dr. Sawchuk and the support of the Aging, Communications and Technology Lab, who are supported by Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, who are funding research initiatives, aging and data. So it fits into her mandate, and it's been extremely beneficial for us. I will introduce Dr. Sawchuk and give a brief bio, and it's extremely brief because I could use 14 pages to identify her. And then Kim is going to take over and chair and monitor today's session. So for all of you, many of you know Kim. Kim has been a friend of Seniors Action Quebec for well over a decade now, and she is the director of Engage, a research center for aging in Montreal, and the ACTLab, which stands for Aging, Communications and Technology at Concordia University. She holds a Concordia University research chair in mobile media studies, which focuses on how older adults engage with digital technologies in their everyday lives, as well as critical disability studies. Dr. Sawchuk has written numerous articles, book chapters, policy reports on aging with technology. Her research often involves participatory action methods and finding creative collaborative solutions to shared social issues in the name of social justice. Kim is an active member on the board of RECA, which is representing elders, communities against abuse. And most recently, she has co-developed an escape room on elder adult mistreatment with community organizations and experts in elder abuse. Kim, I can't thank you enough. I'm looking forward to hearing everything that you're all going to tell us. I appreciate all your support. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it immediately over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. And I'd like to say it's a pleasure working with you and with Seniors Action Quebec. It's so exciting to see the interest in our community to have a discussion about this topic. When Ruth proposed it to me, I quickly realized that this is a topic of interest to absolutely everybody, but also asking the question of how does it actually implicate and affect us as we are aging, and for those of us, all of us who are growing older. So I appreciate the chance to have put this together, and also realizing that no one person can answer the questions that we're all asking now. This is a field that's changing extremely rapidly, and the best that we can all do is kind of become acquainted with some of the critical questions and sort of think about how it's affecting us in the different aspects of our lives. So with that, what we're going to do today is we're going to have 4 guest speakers, beginning with Dr. Unmil Karadkar from the Center for Interdisciplinary Research in Aging and Care from the Karl Franzens University at Graz, Austria, followed by Dr. Nelson Shen, who's a project scientist in the Digital Media Health Lab, Krebil Center for NeuroInformatics, Center for Addiction and Mental Health at Toronto, and also an assistant professor and faculty colleague at the Institute of Health and Management at the University of Toronto. This Dr. Shen will be followed by Dr. Joanna Redden from the Faculty of Information and Media Studies from the University of Western Ontario, and also a member of the Aging and Data Project with Unmil. And then we'll hear from Marussia Levesque, who's at the Bertman Klein Center, where she's an affiliate, which is at the Harvard Law School in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So each of these participants will be speaking for about 10 minutes. I'm going to introduce them briefly. Like Ruth said, each of them has extraordinary CVs. So I'll try and be brief so that we can hear them in order. And then after that, what will happen is we'll have a question and answer period, and you'll be using the chat to do so. So we'll begin with Unmil, who's a scientist working at the Center for Research in on Aging and Care at the University of Graz in Austria. Before moving to Austria, he was in Texas for 22 years, where he earned a PhD in computer science from Texas A&M. He's been an assistant professor at the School of Information at U of T Austin. He serves on the governing board of Aging and Data and is our governance lead on data management. He's interested in how data is shaped and created by different forces, including technology standards, how interfaces are employed for its generation, on work practices, and how it affects the political and social environment of its creators. He adopts a broad interdisciplinary research agenda and has collaborated and published with scholars in areas such as the basic sciences, educational technology, mobile health, the geosciences, astrodynamics, and power systems engineering. So I turn the mic over to Unmil for his presentation on the development of AI, what it means, and how it intersects with research on aging and care. So Unmil.
Thank you so much, Kim and Ruth, for the very warm welcome and the invitation, honestly. This is an audience that I don't get to speak to enough. And so it's going to be really interesting to hear what you all have to say in response to our 4 presentations. I'm a computer scientist by training, but I've done information science for a long time now. And that has given me a kind of a weird perspective on things. And so when I look at a lot of applications coming out today, which you see as well, you see the word artificial intelligence splashed on practically everything, right? There is AI this and AI that and AI camera and AI bullet and AI whatever it is. There is a lot of business and marketing speak that goes on now with AI because that is the hot thing. Everybody wants AI and you get to see AI wherever you want AI. I'm not going to talk about the business side of it. I'm going to start as a computer scientist and talk more about what AI is, and then jump a little bit into what it means for aging and care. Okay. So from a computational computer science perspective, AI is the design of intelligent machines. Assuming that humans are intelligent, how do we go about creating machines that can mimic our behavior? And not just our physical behavior, but our intellectual behavior. And what that means is that there are as many applications to AI as there are definitions of intelligence that we can use. So some things that human beings do is we find things that we need right now. We drive a car, we read, we think, we play games. We can maybe observe the beautiful sunset and describe it to someone, right? Now, the question becomes, can we have machines that do something similar? Since the 1950s, computer scientists and psychologists together at MIT started to build systems that will do some of these things. Some of the early applications were in playing chess, for example. And in 1995, that became a huge thing when IBM's Deep Blue defeated Garry Kasparov, right? And so AI became a tool that people understand and use since the mid-90s. And one of the things that I always wonder about is why now? And then perhaps some of you are wondering as well, why are we hearing so much about AI now, and why have we not heard about this for the last 20 years, 30 years, if what I said about Deep Blue is right? And the reason is that technology is built on top of each other. we did not just arrive here magically today to make this happen, right? In the 1980s, we had the personal computer revolution when PCs became available to everyone. In the 1990s, these things got connected and they became the internet. And in the early 2000s, we started to see things about phones and computers that we can carry around in our hand. And in the next decade, these gained wide acceptance, starting with these text phones where we would all type number keys to type messages, right? We have moved on from that. In the last 10 years, in the 2010s, there was the use of these devices to create social media and get everyone to communicate. And now we hold processing power, storage power in our hand that was unthinkable 20 years ago. And so the culmination of all of these things is we have tremendous amount of storage and we have a tremendous amount of ability to process stored data. And these are two key things to build AI technologies. You have to have a lot of data and you have to have the ability to make inferences, to judge what is good and bad from these data, right? And that is processing. So to expand on that a little bit, what we do in terms of technical development of an AI system is we collect lots of data and we analyze this data. And we take what we want to take and we discard a whole bunch of other things, right? And these things are called variables. So if you have a name, address, date of birth, we choose which of these things matter. If you are a telemarketing company, the address probably matters more and the date of birth matters more. On the other hand, if you are trying to make sales predictions for Amazon, maybe the address doesn't matter so much. The age matters a lot more, right? So the variable and the quality of that data changes depending upon your application. Then we find relationships or repetitions. We take data from lots of people and we try to find what is similar and what is dissimilar. And these things are called patterns. So we try to find patterns and we figure out which patterns matter and which patterns don't matter. So this is pattern recognition, pattern selection, pattern analysis, pattern filtering. A lot of these operations take place before we can identify patterns that interest us, patterns which are, so to speak, winning patterns, right? If you are playing chess, which moves gives you the biggest chance of winning? If you are Amazon, which pattern, which association gives you the biggest chance of selling something to a customer? Once we have our winning pattern, this is almost always a probabilistic thing. So you're going to get scores of this pattern is very good and this pattern is less good and this pattern is even less significant, right? And so then an algorithm has to decide which of these patterns to apply and select a recommended course of action based on these patterns selected. So who should we show a certain video to on YouTube or on TikTok? There are billions of people uploading videos. Which video should we show to whom is a really, really challenging question. And the advertising of the company depends on successfully answering that question, right? So it's always a challenge of managing competing decisions and finding the optimal decision for all of these things. But when it gets presented to a human being, they only see the output. They don't see all of the work that has gone behind the scenes to make that happen. So for us as consumers, these seem like systems that know everything and do everything, but we don't see the uncertainty that is going on behind the decision-making involved in the process. And how this matters in terms of aging is that because the field started by saying, we are computer scientists and we are going to mimic human intelligence. Today's computer scientists also take a very problem-solving approach to AI. A lot of AI is driven by, let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can do this. And how well we can do this, right? Not just if. So a lot of the AI tools that are developed for aging and care tend to focus on the problems associated with aging and care, what is called in the aging research as the decline narrative. The human body is declining, it is prone to failure, and AI is going to be your knight in shining armor, and it's going to save the day. And everybody will kneel before the AI and thank it, right? So some of the things, the problems that we hear about is loneliness. Older people don't have enough support. So let's create pets that will keep them company and that will help them without a lot of management, right? The AI will take care of the chores, but you will have a pet. Fitness, let's track your food and water and activity, and let's recommend the regimen for you. Let's develop personalized medicine for people, and let AI pick which is the best medication for you. Detecting falls. Let's have cameras everywhere and sensors everywhere, and the technology will detect when someone falls down. And the problems that you run into with this approach very, very quickly is that I'm going to summarize this in 3 R's. So there's a problem of representation, because what we all want is another R, which is reliability. We want to depend upon these solutions. So the first problem you run into is representation. It is inclusion of diversity. Old people are not all the same. So how do we make sure that we include people of different ages, different infirmities, different abilities, interests, geography, gender, what have you, right? Socioeconomic status. The second R that you run into problems with is responsibility. Who takes the responsibility that this thing will function adequately? And if something goes wrong, who will bear the responsibility for that failure? What will that responsibility look like? And the third R that I want to leave you with is recovery. Every system fails. Every technology fails. When something fails, in the human world, we mediate this through communication. If I don't understand something that Ruth or Kim are saying, they can go, excuse me, or I notice that they have a confused look and I stop, right? How do you get AI systems to recover from failure? And I think that is where a lot of the legislation is being targeted in terms of privacy, in terms of reliability, in terms of getting responsibility to where it belongs. And with that, back to Kim. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Unmil. I can't believe what you packed into the history of AI for us in 10 minutes. Not an easy feat. Who needs chat GPT when you have Unmil, is what I say. So we're going to move to our next speaker. Give everybody a chance to write some notes and questions down while I'm introducing Dr. Nelson Shen from the University of Toronto, who's going to discuss how AI is being used in the health sector with an emphasis on his work on digital health compassion AI, what it means and how it's possible. Briefly, because Nelson has an extraordinary CV as well, he's a project scientist for the Digital Mental Health Lab at the Krebil Center for NeuroInformatics, Center for Addictions and Mental Health. He's also an assistant professor in health informatics faculty lead for Health Systems Research Program at the Institute of Health Policy Management and Evaluation at U of T. He's currently wrapping up a healthcare fellowship in compassion and AI. And his research asks broadly this question: how might we design, implement, and improve digital health innovations to empower, activate, and support those seeking and needing care? Nelson's research engages patients, families, clinicians, and other knowledge users in designing digital health technologies, processes, policies, and strategies. And patient privacy is a focal point of his research, an off-cited adoption and implementation barrier in health informatics. Nelson's work aims to illustrate the nuances of the patient and public privacy perspectives and identify ways to foster public trust and acceptance in this ever-evolving and very unregulated digital health and AI ecosystem. So it's a pleasure to have Nelson here with us virtually in the Zoom room. And I invite Nelson now to open his mic.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, everyone. And thank you for this opportunity to chat. I'm really excited to be here and share a little bit about my work, talk a little bit about how AI is being used in healthcare. For me, I'm a scientist at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And what I do there is we see how we can move ideas and innovations into action or practice. So a lot of my work is talking to people and understanding what their needs are and how can we design these technologies to meet their needs, their care needs, whether they're a clinician or a patient or just the general public. So, this falls in line with my work, and I'm really curious to hear what you have to say today. So my definition of AI, it's really systems that act by sensing and interpreting data, and then they learn and then reason and decide what the best course of action is. And I'll walk you through some of the uses of AI in healthcare. It's like said earlier, it's evolving and rapidly, and it's super dynamic. So this is a non-comprehensive list, but I'll try my best to walk you through it, and to kind of help you navigate it, I'll walk it through a care journey so that you can see how it can interact with you at each step. So one of the greatest things that I think AI can impact the public and those needing care is providing them with navigation tools. So we recently did or not recently, time's all a blur these days, but last couple of years, we did a survey on what are the digital health needs of the Canadian population in terms of mental health. And one of the biggest things we found was that people don't really know what's out there to support their care, both from a digital standpoint and then from a navigating the healthcare system perspective as well. So this is where I feel AI might have the greatest impact, and especially reaching those vulnerable groups that haven't had the opportunity or haven't chosen to seek care or receive treatment. So there's been a lot of chatbots or conversational AI being implemented right now. So chatbots are, I'm not sure if you've encountered them before, but it's an interface where you could just type questions and then they'll give you back answers on whatever question it is. And it's powered by AI. There's no one on the back end, but then now they're able to make it seem like there's a human behind that's answering your questions. And that's really a way to help people navigate how we can gain the access we need or the resources we need to better support our care or seek access to care. An example of what we do at CAMH, we have this, it's really low tech and not really AI, but it kind of serves the same idea where we have some sort of decision tree, and then people can text questions to this the centralized database, and then they will send the appropriate resources or links to certain apps that they can use to support their mental health care, depending on their needs. So we've done that in Saskatchewan, and now we're looking at how we can use that to support social workers who have the highest level of burnout. So how can we support social workers in their practices? And then next, once we start seeking care or even start getting to that point, realizing that we need care, then there's tools to help you self-diagnose. So one really big milestone early on this year is this AI called Limbic AI, and this was used in the UK, where it can help people diagnose their mental health needs or what their mental health conditions they have, and then triage them, so send them to the right care provider. So this has actually been implemented in the NHS, which is the healthcare system in the UK, and it's really interesting to see where this will go from there. One part that really isn't talked about a lot in the literature is education for patients, and I feel like this is something that might be overlooked, but I think there is really great potential there, and I'll share some of my work around that as we go along. Another way it could be used is monitoring. So you can wear apps and wearables, and it can help detect certain trends, certain patterns, and then help predict whether you need certain types of care. And then next step along the pathway is actual treatment. So outside of mental health, there's a lot of work done in imaging and image processing to help clinicians diagnose more accurately. Right now, we're looking at how we can use unstructured notes and how I could predict certain conditions. So some of our work is around how we can use it to better understand suicide risk and prevention. There's also guided treatments through AI. So instead of having a therapy session with your therapist, you can use an AI with an avatar that will speak to you and interact with you as well. A lot of the work I'm doing right now at CAMH is understanding how can this patient data be used to predict outcomes and support clinical decision-making as well. So beyond the walls of the clinical care, there's ways that AI can support healthcare as well. So that's administrative support. So our healthcare workforce is currently undergoing a lot of burnout. They're all stretched in many directions. So we're really seeking ways to we can alleviate that. Perhaps it's supporting some sort of documentation or administrative tasks. Another way it can support the clinical workforce is through training as well. So we're also exploring how AI can be used to train physicians or clinicians in whatever topic that may be of interest. So lastly, I want to talk about it from a larger healthcare system. And, we're always trying to achieve this thing, what we call learning health system. And what that is, we're trying to take data and then use it in real time to support all aspects of care from the point of delivery, point of care to system planning, and using that as a way to maximize the efficiency and effectiveness in how we allocate resources and how we deliver care. So that's kind of an overview of how AI is being used in many spaces. What I'll go into now is a little bit about my work in AI and compassion, what we call digital compassion. And compassion is what I define as being aware of another's experience of suffering or need, and then feeling moved, and then appraising your own role within that, and then making judgments about how you might be able to help. So it's a lot more than just empathy, but it's that actual stepping out and helping as well. So my AMS project, I'm funded by AMS Healthcare for my fellowship. And what I'm looking to understand is how might we foster public trust in innovative uses of patient data? There are a lot of benefits to it that can make the system more effective, from point of care to systems planning. And how do we do that in a way that doesn't violate the trust of the public? Because we've seen many times it's been done wrong, and we're trying to learn from our mistakes. And that's where a lot of patient engagement, public engagement is a part of my work. My project is looking at how might we imagine consent in a more meaningful way. So I'm sure many of you have experienced the scroll down to the bottom and click agree without really reading it. So how do we make it so that people are more informed about about what their data is how their data is being used, who's using it, for what purposes, and what benefits there are along with risks as well. So with all of this, we're also understanding how we can use the HOPE app data, which is a suicide safety planning app, to better understand suicide risk, suicide prevention, and also how can we better tailor our services for those who might be at risk. And in terms of the two ideas I'm looking at, one is trust. So for me, compassion is how do we foster trust? How can we foster this belief that an organization will use my data with benevolence, integrity, and competence? And then second is how do we enable agency and autonomy? So that's defined as an individual's person-centered approach that includes a patient as an active participant in decision-making regarding their care. So really empowering a patient to be a partner in their care. And then my other project that I want to highlight here is more at CAMH. And what we're doing, I guess my design question is, how might we use patient data to enable better decision-making about mental health and empower patients to be partners in their care? So I'm designing a patient journey dashboard. So providing patients with trends about their recovery and their treatment, and hoping that can support their decision making, and understanding how we can use AI to support that. And to make, in the lens of compassion, I'm trying to understand it. How can we do it in a way that makes sense for patients, that does really address their needs, instead of us giving you a result? So this is what I call co-designing the co-design, where I'm working with patients to design the project, and then working with patients to design the dashboard. So that pretty much wraps up my work. So I look forward to hearing your questions, and thank you again for this opportunity to share some of my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Nelson, for that really, like Unmil, very succinct 10-minute overview of the ways that the work that is being done in medicine, specifically, I guess, psychiatric medicine, is also using AI within the healthcare, within healthcare. So we'll return to some of these questions, I believe, at the end. And now I'm going to introduce Dr. Joanna Redden from the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at the University of Western Ontario, who's going to talk to us about data harms. What kind of data harms are associated with AI and aging? So as you can see from the composition of this panel, everybody has a different type of expertise, a different kind of position, and a different knowledge, different type of knowledge coming from their training, I guess, and experience. So I think that's why I'm so delighted that Ruth agreed that we could have 4 speakers today and not just 1. So to go to Dr. Redden, Dr. Redden's research combines her interests in datafication, politics, governance, and social justice. She's the co-director of the Data Justice Lab, and her current projects involve mapping and analyzing the social and political implications of increasing government uses of predictive and automated data systems, learning about data harms and those trying to redress these harms, and finally, working towards greater civic participation in a datafied society. She's the co-author of the book Data Justice from 2022 Sage, author of the book The Mediation of Poverty, The News, New Media, and Politics from 2014, and co-editor of Compromised Data from Social Media to Big Data from 2015. So she's been working in this field for quite a long time, like many of the people on this panel. Joanna has published articles in academic journals such as Big Data and Society, and I highly recommend an article she wrote for Scientific American, which I use in all of my teaching, which is really explains in lay language all about data harms and the Data Harms Project. Dr. Redden has held fellowships at the Infoscape Center for Study of Social Media at the university formerly known as Ryerson, at Goldsmith Media Research Center, and prior to joining Western, she was a senior lecturer at Cardiff University. And before this, at the University of Calgary. We're happy that Joanna is back in Canada and working with all of us here. In addition to all of this, Joanna's also been a reporter and a researcher in documentary TV and politics, which always informs her research and writing. And she's a member of the Aging and Data Project. And with that, I invite Joanna to open her mic and to speak to us about data harms.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Kim. I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm learning so much already from previous presenters. I think this kind of event is necessary and valuable, and I hope that we can all do more of these kinds of events. So I wanted to start with a brief story just to tell you where I'm coming from. So I wanted to start by giving you a little bit of background about the data harm record. So where I'm coming from, my interest in data harms, my research in this area comes out of deep frustration. So around 2015, 2016, I had already been reading lots of accounts of the way that people were already being negatively affected by different kinds of data systems all over the world. And every time there seemed to be a kind of a government statement, a recommendation around ethics as related to AI. Anytime this was discussed in the news, anytime I looked at any marketing material, the same line would reoccur over and over again. With AI comes great opportunity and also great risk. This will be no surprise to you. I'm sure you're seeing this around you now all the time. And this is really frustrating for me because I think that a discourse of risk suggests that harm might occur in the future, right? And that is, in my view, quite enabling. If we think that harm is going to happen potentially in the future, then that means that we don't act urgently. There's not pressure put upon those in positions of authority to ensure that we have the level of oversight and protection that we need. And so the data harm record was started as a way to keep track of the ways that people were already being negatively affected. And so to combine as much as possible any kind of published account or mention of the way that people were experiencing harm. But it was also meant to better understand the harms that people are experiencing, because of course, people have long been harmed by different kinds of data practices, but we are entering an age where something very different is happening. There is an ability now to collect data about people far more data about people than ever was possible before, to combine this data in ways that was never possible before, and to make a kind of observations or to identify patterns that some deem are significant, to make decisions that affect us in ways that didn't happen before. We're in a new age, right, which we're all grappling with. And so what I wanted to do with the data harm record is to also try to understand what kind of harms are people experiencing? How do we need to confront the harms that we're seeing, and to gain a better big picture appreciation of where we're heading collectively as a society, societies, and where we may need to change course. And so what I wanted to do today was just to begin to talk about the kind of harms that we're seeing, but I'm deliberately not doing that in a way that should suggest that we don't have any power, right? We know about the kind of harms that I'm going to talk about today because of people like all of you in the rooms that you're in, people talking, getting together, and sharing information about what they're experiencing, people trying to challenge and seek redress for the harms they're experiencing, and people coming together to prevent harm. So all of the examples that I'm sharing with you come from the work that people have been doing on the ground around data harms to kind of publicize and challenge them and to seek better features. Okay, so the kinds of ways, so where to start? Right, I'll start by a definition of harm. So I want to begin by saying that the definition of harm that I'm proposing, I think, should be a starting point. I think we need to collectively decide what data harms mean at our current moment, in our contemporary moment. But as a starting point, I would argue that harm is much more than material or physical injury. If we think about the ways that people are being negatively affected by data systems, by AI, and the kind of harms we have in the data harm record, and I'm just going to post this record in the chat. It's available online. What you can see is that people are experiencing harms that are occurring at a psychological level. People are experiencing a lot of anxiety as a result of the ways that harm is occurring. People are experiencing harm that affects them individually, but people are also experiencing harm as a result of the way that data is used for political campaigning, for sharing misinformation and false information. And it's for these reasons that I think we must extend our definition of harm. We must think about data harms as being experienced at individual, but also community and societal levels. I build on the work of Daniel Keats-Citron and Daniel Soliv, and they argue that we need to think about harm as the impairment or setting back of the interests of a person, community, or society. So this would mean that we can think of a data harm as something that would mean that a person, a community, or a society is worse off as a result of a data-related practice. Now, the kind of harms that we've been recording in the data harm record, there are harms that relate to exploitation. So this is connected to a loss of privacy. So we know that, for example, people are experiencing harm because of the ways that data is being collected about them as they do things like look up information about health conditions, right? There are a lot of websites online who sell data they collect about people who access their content to third parties, and we are not always given notice. In fact, we're seldom given notice about what data is being collected about us as we participate on websites and share information. And we're certainly not given information about how our data is being sold on to third parties, and we most definitely are not getting information about how those third parties are using our data. There is a lot of concern about data brokers and the way that data brokers are collecting information about people. that would contain data about their search behaviors, for example, and then they're combining that data with other types of data in order to create profiles, right? And so data brokers, for example, have been found to be compiling lists of people based on their sense of conditions that people might be experiencing, health conditions, like people who may have diabetes or people who may suffer from alcoholism, right? And then those lists are being sold to people for marketing purposes, which puts people in a position of potentially being exploited based on perceived vulnerabilities. And it puts people in a position of potentially being targeted with misinformation or disinformation or with advertising. We know that people are being discriminated against as a result of the uses of particular kinds of technologies. So we're seeing, for example, facial recognition systems being developed. These facial recognition systems that are being developed disproportionately, wrongly identify people. They disproportionately wrongly identify people on the basis of things like gender and skin tone. So as we see facial recognition technologies being implemented all around us, you are more likely to be falsely identified through the use of a facial recognition system if you have a darker skin tone or if you're a woman. We are seeing, and I guess this is all to say that the kinds of issues and concerns that relate to that come up in connection to data harms, some of them can be linked to age specifically, but the kinds of harms that people are experiencing, these could connect with age, but they also connect with many other issues, right? So data harms are occurring at all levels of society, and they're affecting everyone. And this is really important, and it's why we need to develop collective responses. We're also seeing harms that are occurring because of pervasive surveillance. And I don't think we know yet how to talk about this or what this means fully. I think we understand that we have a creeping sense of creepiness. We feel like our privacy is being invaded. This is leading to, it affects our emotions, it affects our relationships, because we're conscious that when we communicate, someone could be watching or listening, or that data may be collected in a way that we are not sure about how that's going to affect us down the road. We're seeing increasing data breaches, and this leads to psychological harm as it creates anxiety or stress, this feeling of being vulnerable. We're seeing, as already mentioned, a kind of manipulation that is happening in terms of elections, the way that people are being targeted with dark posts, with fake information, right, in a way that's not transparent and that's not accountable. We're seeing, to some extent, exclusion. So one of the things that I look at is the way that systems are automated, that affects decision-making. And so we're seeing people being wrongly excluded from services, and potentially an automation of care. So, which raises a lot of questions for us about what we want going forward. All this to say that people, and I'm going to wrap it up now because I think I'm just about over time. So all this to say, I've got 2 minutes. Oh, fantastic. Okay, that gives me time to talk about the what do we do piece. And this is really important. And so the what do we do piece, well, one, I think we push against this idea that is being widely disseminated. It's this idea that all of this is somehow our fault. We push against this idea that we should be individually responsible for protecting ourselves. There are things we can do. We can use search engines like DuckDuckGo, for example, that don't collect personal data about us. We can go into incognito mode when we search. We can do some things, that's absolutely true. But we are all being affected, as these wide-ranging harms should demonstrate, and therefore we need to be advocating for better protections, for better oversight. We need to be working more together and organizing around this. We could be advocating for public registries, which have been called for widely about where and how systems are in use. There should be registries. These registries should include the way that data systems are being used in ways that affect our electoral processes. We should be calling for more resourcing of regulators like privacy commissioners so that they can do preemptive investigations. We could be calling for no-go areas. So we could be coming together and we could be deciding, okay, are there particular areas where we think AI should not be used? We could reach out to our politicians or political representatives, for example. We could reach out to our city councils and start pushing for no-go areas of application. We could be calling for things like a national algorithmic safety board. We could be challenging normalization, as I think events like this do. Just because something exists, certain kinds of data practices exist, doesn't mean they should. And we should be starting to ensure that we have more widespread data literacy in our communities. And our public libraries are already playing a really significant role here. And we could be working to do more in that area. And there are a lot more ideas and things we could do together, but I'll stop there. And I can't wait to hear the next presenter and hear the questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Joanna. I'm just going to turn off my phone, my little timer here before it dings off. For that, again, really like the other talks, inspiring list of both what's happening in terms of what is a data harm, but also things to think about that we can do. So there's a sense that we're not just subject to all of these decisions that seem to be happening from nowhere. And with that, I'll return, and I'd also like to thank all of our presenters for being so on time. Everybody's really stuck to their 10 minutes, which means there's going to be lots of time for discussion in the chat. I'm monitoring the chat. As people are listening, feel free to post your questions right away and your thoughts. The chat can be like our collective digital unconscious that we'll bring to consciousness at the end of this session. So please feel free at any time to post a comment or ask your question immediately, and we'll try and scroll through them and get to all of them. So our last presenter, who's going to... Our last presenter is going to pick up on some of these. Marussia Levesque is going to talk again about AI policy in Canada and talk about some tools that governments may need to fulfill their responsibilities and mandates, hopefully as stewards, not just of governments that oversee for the sake of overseeing in a big brother or sister kind of way, but as stewards, responsible stewards, I think, of the public good in this space. And a bit about Marussia. She is an SJD candidate at the Harvard School of Law. Her dissertation will be titled AI Governance Towards a Polycentric Model. And what this means is that Marussia is examining how AI governance is currently siloed, spliced up, duplicated, and inefficiently allocated amongst different stakeholders. In addition to her research on AI and legal theory and governance in the tech sector, she has examined AI driven discrimination. Marussia's research interests also cover machine learning and labor law in the tech industry. She's looked at the geopolitical implications of Chinese AI developments and corporate social responsibility and human rights law. Marussia Levesque graduated with a Bachelor of Law and LLB from McGill University in 2012 and holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Concordia University, yay, in computation arts, which is where I do believe we met Marussia many years ago. Her publications include a really important recent paper that I recommend called Analog Privilege, that analyzes how elites are able to avoid artificial intelligence or AI systems and benefit from personalized treatment. So again, as a companion to this today's talk, perhaps I'll discuss with Ruth and Katya how we might be able to make available papers from our presenters and maybe further resources. And that's something I know that we can work on with Seniors Action Quebec, so that for all of you here with this interest, you can continue to educate yourself and read more about this topic, and hopefully come up with ideas for future webinars or seminars for all of us to organize based on your interest. So with that, I invite our last speaker for today, Marussia Levesque.
Thank you so much, Kim, and I'm delighted to be among you today. So, ageism is one of the most common forms of discrimination, especially in contexts like employment, healthcare, etc. And certainly it has great use cases, as we've heard from others today, but also potential harms, as we've also heard from other speakers today. Yet we rarely talk about ageism in the context of AI. So through that prism, I want to walk us through the different laws, frameworks that apply in Canada to give us an idea of the existing protections and maybe start a conversation about whether those protections are enough to appropriately address AI-driven harm, and what else should we be doing in Canada. So to start, it might seem obvious, but we already have general purpose laws that can come in handy. Laws don't have to be technology specific. In fact, broad principles should be agnostic to the medium of harm. So at a very high level, we have international law treaties that bind states and forbid them to engage in discrimination, be it race-based, age-based, or so on. And it also compels them to adopt domestic laws to actually protect people on the ground from the abuse of private actors. So that's sort of one piece of the puzzle. The other is constitutional protection. So we have a charter which protects us against age-based discrimination, again, from the state. And we also have human rights codes that bind private actors, for example, employers. So they forbid workplace discrimination on the basis of age, but they do allow employers some discretion if ensuring sort of full equality would put excessive constraints on their business activities. So the exact tests and criteria vary among jurisdictions, but that's the kind of general picture is, yes, you have to ensure equality and you can't discriminate on the basis of age, but there's kind of a limit to what sort of positive obligations we are imposing on employers. And I think that's really interesting in the context of AI systems, because as Unmil stated earlier on, these systems can basically infer a lot of information from the data that's out there. So one thing they could infer is people's age. And we have these automated applicant tracking systems, which basically do a preliminary screening on resumes to sort of weed out applicants. So what if these systems inadvertently weed out anyone that's, over 50, for instance, because it's looking at the current workforce and trying to make parallels with that. So that's sort of one use case in which you could think of sort of analog era protections against workplace discrimination coming in quite handy. Now, as I said, the criteria vary across contexts, but one common an important thread in Canada is this idea of substantive equality. So we're not just looking at formal equality of treating like cases alike. What we're looking at is ensuring that the effect of a practice of an AI system is actually fair. So we recognize that identical or facially neutral treatment can frequently produce inequality on the ground. And in the words of Justice Abella, a law can include seemingly neutral rules, a law or a practice, but in operation, it can have sort of built-in headwinds for members of protected groups, including age-based groups. So this goes for AI systems too. You may not intentionally build an AI system to be ageist, but if that's consistently their effect, then anti-discrimination laws might take issue with this. So this is a very incomplete portrait of some of the sort of analog frameworks that we have, broad application frameworks that can, to some extent, address some of the AI-driven harms that we see happening, including ageism. Now, let's move to AI-specific frameworks. So for background, Canada is a leader in AI by many metrics. So we have world-class fundamental research with many breakthroughs coming from our universities. In 2021, we ranked 7th in terms of AI publications globally. However, we only ranked 15 in terms of patent outputs. So what does this mean? We're better at fundamental research than we are at market-ready innovation. And that's important to sort of frame the current debates about AI legislation, because it does sort of influence the orientations of our laws. And we can talk more about that in the Q&A period if you want. At any rate, as of January 2022, we had $1.1 billion in government grants and contributions that have been awarded across Canada. So that's federal public funding. Might seem like a lot, 1.1 billion, but it pales in comparison to investments in the US or in China, for that matter. So when we think about AI policy in Canada, I mean, one eye is inwards towards domestic effects, but the other is outwards in terms of positioning Canada in the global sphere. We also have about 500 AI firms, both startups and mature companies, so a pretty decent AI ecosystem, which again, AI legislation kind of keeps an eye on as it tries to legislate the use of AI in Canada. Before we even get to actual legislation, though, I want to say that we've been thinking about AI policy for many years. We were among the first countries to really start a reflection and raise the matter in multilateral and multi-stakeholder forums. So for full disclosure, I was at the federal government involved in those discussions as the lead on AI and human rights matters in 2018-19, obviously speaking here in my personal capacity. And even before that, in 2017, we had the Pan-Canadian AI strategy, which aimed at coordinating federal investment to drive the adoption of AI. So I mentioned all these pieces of the puzzle, if you will, to say that before we get to an actual bill about AI regulation in Canada, there are many other efforts that operated in the background. And this isn't an exhaustive list. I did mention, for instance, our pivotal role in creating the Global Partnership on AI through the G7 process. So this is quote unquote soft law, but these discussions, these dialogues about responsible AI, about rights respecting AI have been happening in the background for many, many years. And then enter sort of more binding regulation now. In 2019, the federal government issued a directive requiring any government service to undergo an impact assessment before integrating AI to its activities and to establish guardrails according to the risk level. So what does this mean in plain English? When the government is trying to use AI, it has to preemptively think through what are the risks of using AI, of deploying AI in my particular context. And depending on these risks, it needs to make sure that the guardrails are appropriate. We also have an AI advisory council with a mandate to identify opportunities to create economic growth, and I'm quoting here, that benefits all Canadians, and ensure that AI advancements reflect Canadian values. So before we even get to legislation, we have this double goal in AI policy, which I think is really informative of where we are today. On the one corner, if you will, you have this idea of pushing innovation, promoting innovation. And on the other, you have this idea of reflecting Canadian values. Now, certainly these don't have to be in contradiction to one another. In fact, they can mutually reinforce each other. But I'm going to argue that as it stands, our legislation doesn't quite do that. Now, fast forward to 2022. Basically out of nowhere, the government comes out with an AI bill, which surprised a lot of people, including ruining many of my weekends. And that bill was attached to a larger privacy bill, which had been expected. So the government, the federal government, basically tried to address all digital policy in one omnibus bill. So this is the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, or IDA for short. And it takes a risk-based approach, so a tiered approach. you have high impact systems that are subject to sort of stronger obligations, and then the rest, if you will. So these high impact systems, they have to undergo, I'm getting balloons, so I guess maybe I only have 2 minutes left. Perfect. I love the sign, by the way. So these impact assessments have to sort of map preemptively problems, and they have to monitor and mitigate the risks. Now, these risks include adverse impact on age through the notion of biased output. So this is really the key operative provision here. If you've been falling asleep or thinking about your coffee, this is the 15 seconds to give me your undivided attention. So we have this idea of companies having to preemptively map potential adverse impact on age of their AI systems. However, and I'm going to end here, the bill is severely flawed in several aspects. First, the companies themselves decide if their system is high impact. So this is really the fox guarding the hen house. And it is especially problematic given that the commissioner in charge of overseeing the law's implementation is nested within the department that pushes innovation. So it's like hitting the brakes and the accelerator at the same time. Second, the meat of the law, if you will, the actual substantive obligations are to be announced. We don't know what they are yet. They are going to be decided later on in regulations that are subject to a much more opaque process than the actual debate of the law. So this is a bit sort of granular in the details, but I'm going to post this piece here, which I wrote with a colleague, kind of explaining why that's a problem in more details. So that's AI legislation in a nutshell. In theory, it could provide us some protection against many of the harms that AI could imply or could involve, including ageism. But as it stands, companies have too much latitude, and we don't even know what the actual obligations are. So this is a good place for civil society to agitate because this bill hasn't been properly consulted in many people's opinion. So with this, I'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Marussia. So again, I'd like to clap and thank all of the speakers this morning for providing such succinct overviews of a very complex set of issues from their perspectives, realizing as well that so much is not solvable yet, but what we need is better public discussion, and that's why we're here today. As you saw, some balloons came up in my Zoom chat. I have no control over that. A good example of unintended consequences, no harm. Thank goodness it was balloons, but what if it had been something else? It could have sent a very wrong signal to both the audience and to our speaker. So again, another example of the intrusiveness of these well-meaning systems, I suppose, having consequences that sometimes seem to be beyond our agency and control, but that we should have more agency and control in understanding and knowing how to safeguard ourselves and have some say in what the future will be. So with that, we have a lot of questions in the chat so far, and I'm just going to go to the top.
Yeah, just a minute, Kim.
Oh, sorry.
We have on the agenda a health break.
Oh.
So we're going to let everybody stretch, get a cup of coffee, tea, and this will give Kim and Katia a bit of time to organize the questions. If you have not put your questions in the chat box, now is the time to do it. And I suggest that everybody be back here ready to go at 11:15, the latest. And we'll start up and then we'll go right into question period.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm really glad we have two hard drives at work this morning, yours and mine.
So thanks very much.
Well, see you.
Well, welcome back, everybody. And now we're going into another very interesting part. And I think we're going to get a great deal more information added on to all the great pieces that we got just before. We're going to go to the question period, and we'll go till about 10 to noon. And Kim is going to lead this, and When necessary, Katia, the Executive Director of Seniors Action Quebec, will be her backup. So without further ado from me, Kim, I'm turning it over to you. And when we get to 10 to 12, I'll be back to do the wrap up.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Ruth. So the first question is from someone named Ruth Peltier. And Ruth has a concern about AI being able to self-diagnose. How can we be assured that there will be not insufficient intelligence and serious errors will be made? I also worry about the lack of personal contact with our medical professionals. So I think this is probably a question for Nelson.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one thing I want to say before I answer that question is that I was just presenting a bunch of different use cases. A lot of this isn't in place yet, but so we're just dreaming at the moment. I think everyone's really excited about AI and where it can go. In terms of your question about the self-diagnosis, so that one example I brought up is from the UK, and the actual AI itself underwent a lot of scrutiny in terms of certification from their version of the FDA. So it got classified as an actual medical device. And in order to get there, there needs to be very rigorous evaluations in proving that it actually works and that there aren't any errors. So I think it was like predictive to, I think like 97th percent accuracy or something quite high. So, you need to, in order for these things to be put into practice, it needs to go through that rigorous evaluation. Otherwise, a lot of bad things can happen. And, there was a lot of discussion about the equity of things and, data that goes in. If that's faulty data, you might not get the right output. So a lot of guardrails in terms of governance and evaluation of the algorithms.
So that certification issue, I think, is something that we haven't talked about. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Do you want to speak a bit to the issue of personal contact with medical professionals? Oh
yeah, great. Sorry, that was a two-parter. So I think one we're not quite there yet. I think in terms of AI use in healthcare, we're still trying to figure out how that works. We're figuring out our governance structures within the hospital, what those terms of use are going to be, what is ethical, what isn't. So there's a lot of discussion at the hospital level right now. In terms of replacing the professional, what we learned early on during the pandemic when we made that shift to virtual care, we were all celebrating because it's like, yes, we finally got this up and running. We started finding that people want some sort of choice. Some people didn't like it, even though it was more accessible. There's a lot of benefits to it, but it just wasn't for them. So I think part of this work is really understanding what those perspectives are and emphasizing that this isn't a replacement. You do have a choice, but for those in a system where we're already so stretched, it might be a stopgap until you get that in-person care. So that's kind of, how I look at it.
Okay, thank you so much, Nelson. I'm going to move to a different kind of question. There was, again, because of the order of speakers, several on the medical front, but we'll try and mix it up a bit. So Jill Chieson asks, I've heard stories about how some folks have casual conversations about things and suddenly get ads promoting products on their phones the next day. It makes them feel invaded, that creepiness Joanna was talking about. How will this kind of activity be tempered? And I guess that can be from either end. So I think this is maybe for Unmil or Joanna or whoever else feels they would like to answer this.
I'm happy to jump in a little bit and say that some of this is correlation and some of this is causation. Okay, and what that means is maybe such things happened before, but you were not sensitized to them. If you spoke of something and never noticed or did not remember, the conversation was not significant enough, and you saw advertisements related to what you talked about, you probably wouldn't even notice it. But I think in this case, what happened is that the conversation was significant enough. You remembered it, and then the next day you saw the advertisement and it stuck. That's the correlation part of it. There is a lot of correlation that happens that gets attributed to causation, and which is also possible, but we don't have any concrete evidence for it yet. So if you have the microphone on your phone, if you use Siri, or if you use Hey Google or technologies like that, which are always on, if you have Alexa in your home, chances are some of your conversation does get recorded and used in some fashion. I think use of such nature is already prohibited by law. But again, any law is as good as its enforcement. So it's really hard to say whether this is something you just know.
He just got cut off.
Yeah, I think he's having some technical difficulties.
Okay.
Let's continue, and he'll join us.
Joanna, do you want to jump in? And while we try and reconnect with Unmil or Marussia?
So we were just talking about this in my class last week. This is one that I think is coming up in conversations all the time. It's an area that I feel like I want to do more research into. I don't know to what extent like my knowledge of what's happening in this area is kept up with what's actually happening in practice. It's really difficult because there's such little transparency around some of these practices. And I think that needs to change. So for example, this would be an ideal thing for a privacy commissioner to investigate, and to kind of look at what's been happening in different jurisdictions in terms of challenges or complaint. I can speak to the data harm record. So there is an example in the data harm record of a woman whose conversation in her home was captured, recorded, and then email or sent to somebody else, right? So this is an example of this. I can think about Valerie Steeves at the University of Ottawa, who had done some research on Smart Barbie, for example, which was a toy for children that the Barbie was the Barbie was designed to kind of capture audio information from children speaking to it and then speak back. And there were real concerns about where that data was going. I had students research smart televisions and raise concerns about the way in which data was being captured by those devices in ways that was not, people weren't made aware of, as well as, video game consoles. But I'm really curious. Unmil, you got cut off, so I'm really curious what you were going to say at the end there, and then I'd love to hear Marussia's thoughts on this because I don't know the kind of the legal protections that are in place currently for this kind of thing.
Marussia, do you want to jump in, and then Unmil, if there's something else you wanted to add? Causality and causation and correlation, boom. Internet.
I was just going to say they dropped my connection right as I say causation is possible.
Okay, thank you. Marussia.
Sure. Well, first, I guess on the legal front, I think that this shows the limits of the current data protection laws that we have or don't have. And you can think of even using it, and specifically the limits of informed consent. So it could very well be that in some of the terms and conditions of these platforms, you are agreeing to having your voice captured for testing purposes, or there's nothing that really prevents these companies from selling it to third-party data brokers. So our model right now puts so much responsibility on people to individually, read a novel of terms and conditions. And there's been experiments on this where the terms and conditions say, you're going to give us the soul of your firstborn child, and no one ever reads those things, obviously. So I think this speaks to the limits of the current models of legislation that we have and the importance of shifting to a more sort of collective view of harms, which puts the onus on companies to proactively map and prevent these harms. And, just a bit more kind of granular answers here with regards to whether these companies are actually engaging in targeted ads based on our on listening in our conversation. Unmil, you might have other things to say, but even if we take for granted that their answer, which is no, we're not doing that, we're not listening to your conversations about buying a toaster, that's not why you got a toaster ad. If we take that for granted, it shows the power of inferences. So these companies can be really accurate in targeting ads without even engaging in those creepy, spying in. It could be that your partner has looked at ads for a toaster on their phone, and it knows the proximity of these two phones and your patterns. So just that signal is enough to feed you that targeted ads. So we really need to think about kind of privacy protection on a much more kind of systemic and broader level than just preventing companies from listening in on your voice, for instance.
Okay, I'm going to move to the next question. There seems to be an assumption that everyone has access, and this is from Linda Shohat, that everyone has access to technology and the digital literacy to use the various application. Many seniors in disadvantaged communities do not have the tech, and many seniors who do lack the skills to use it critically. As access to human healthcare providers diminishes, new exclusions are being created. Comments or thoughts on this to our panelists? Nelson, back to you, I guess, first, and then to others.
So yeah, that's something that I'm very fascinated about, is we think about technology itself just as technology, but it really has a more social aspect to it, where there are inequities in how people can access it and use it. And there's a paper that I love. It's called "Well Intentions Are Not Enough." And as someone who designs these technologies, I take a very patient-centered lens where we engage in the co-design of it, rather than thinking, oh, well, this group of people will like it, and we should just do that. We should really ground it in perspectives and understand how we can make use of that. I understand also that technology isn't going to be for everyone as well, and as our responsibility in the public sector, health sector, we need to find other ways to catch those that might not be able to use it, or find ways to help support them with it. So I think a lot of engagement is often tokenistic, and we need to do a better job of really understanding what the needs and perspectives are before throwing canned ideas at people.
Thank you, Nelson. I just want to say here as well that the Asian Communication Technology Group and Lab have also looked at things like what is the cost of internet and cell phones in a country like Canada as compared to every other country in the world. And we still have some of the highest costs. So we have systemic and infrastructural reasons that it can be difficult for people to acquire the experience that they have, that buying an app, giving someone an iPad, for example, is not enough if you cannot access. Or we live in a subscription-based economy where people are being dollared and nickeled and dimed to death with applications, subscription models that also mean when you subscribe, it can be difficult to unsubscribe. So I think that this question of who can afford and access to all is one that is both about individual choice and learning, but also part of a larger and broader context of telecommunications policy and regulatory decisions that have been made in terms of providing access or not that's affordable. And as we know, as after retirement, our incomes start to diminish, and it becomes, and for us who are female, it's indexed as well, pensions to years in the workforce. So there's all these multiple factors that influence access, which is why only looking at yourself as individually responsible, as Marusi and others have said, can also be a problem, and why we have to take a broader approach where we look at this entire landscape. So that's me adding my 2 cents into this conversation to address this question. Thank you, Nelson. So moving on, there's a very simple but difficult question.
Can I jump in on that one? Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joanna.
I just wanted to jump in real quick because I think it's such an important question. And I think that in terms of pushing back, one of the things that we see happening in other places, like in the United Kingdom, for example, there's starting to be a move toward digital by default systems. And those are hugely problematic because of the ways that people have differential access, as that questioner pointed out. So I think everywhere we see a digital by default kind of move. We need to push back on that. I think we need to be alert to invisibility. So the extent to which decision-making around resources are being made based on like digital signals, like the signals people kind of leave as a result of their engagement with technology. That's a really big problem. And then I also wanted to flag the importance of pushing back against the other kinds of default settings on things like iPhones or Android phones, right? Like we're seeing certain kinds of systems being like automatically put on those phones, and we have little control, like we can't get rid of them. And that's a huge problem because of the way in which those kind of embedded search engines are there. So you use them and then data will be collected about you. That should not be. And then I also just wanted to, last thing, but I'm putting in the chat here, this visualization of data breaches. To me, this is one of the most underreported stories out there. The failure of companies and government bodies to protect our data. They all want it and they fight to get more of it. And yet they don't do enough to protect it once they have it, and they're going for more. And so we need to be politically mobilizing on this issue.
Thank you, Joanna. I'm going to move to a question for Marussia. How can AI respect Canadian values, and what are Canadian values? There's an easy one.
Excellent question. Sometimes vagueness is a feature, not a bug, when you're trying to do a kind of big tent approach to these things. So one could argue that it is also a way to sidestep more binding, robust language like rights respecting AI. That's one avenue. You could also think of Canadian values as, you know, inspired by the Canadian Charter, which only technically applies to state. But sometimes when we talk about charter values, meaning that the charter technically only applies to the government, but it should also color how we think of private activity, the behavior of private firms. So even if they're not technically bound to things like equality and non-discrimination in the same way, they should still respect the spirit of the law. So, you know, it's up to you whether you want to give it a charitable interpretation or not. I would just say that this was in the context of a broad mandate and not a kind of binding obligation. So I think it's okay to say Canadian values, and it is also up to us to define what that is. So that's the beauty of it, is, you know, civil society groups can step in and say, what about us in this process? So there's potential there, I would say.
Thank you. Here's a question from a group who are attending the session from St. Columba House. Are there risks of a cyber attack with these medical applications that chat with patients? And Nelson or Joanna or Unmil or Marussia, any of you can answer, I think, this question, but I'll begin with Nelson. What are the possibilities of cyber attacks on these systems as well that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, that's a scary side of things. You know, it seems like it's becoming more frequent with the cyber attacks, and yeah, I think it is prone to cyber attacks as well. You know, I don't have a real answer for that, and maybe Unmil and Joanna may have a better answer than that.
I would say there are different kinds of cyber attacks, and it depends upon exactly what we are worried about. Is the concern here whether someone's going to hijack the connection in a live stream and take over for the physician and give you bad advice? That's one kind of attack, right? Is the concern here that someone's going to steal the data? Is it a data breach we are talking about? Or is the concern here that the AI algorithm that is processing the data going to be manipulated in ways to benefit bad actors, right? And that's a third kind of cyber attack. And you can think about scenarios other than these, I'm sure, but these are the three that come to my mind right away. And it's hard to get into more detail than that, other than to say there are always risks, and the best we can do is build better locks and hope that no one tries to break down our door.
Anybody else?
One other I guess one other thought just to add to that, I guess, is that there are those like Kathy O'Neill who advocate for auditing of systems across their lifespan. And so this would mean that you would be continually auditing for something like safety after a system has been developed and introduced. And that would be something that would be a means of increasing protection, to be constantly ensuring that you're keeping up with potential threats.
I'm going to a question that's come at the end from Andrew from Seniors Action Quebec. How does a move for increased data protection negatively impact the development of AI, which relies on data to be successful? Anybody?
I'm happy to take a first stab at it, and I'm sure other people will have different perspectives. As I said earlier, AI depends upon the availability of a lot of data, right? And so for me, the opposite of a lot of data is not no data or little data. I think the problem that we are facing right now is lack of transparency and a lack of communication about how the data is used. If we were to communicate to people effectively about the ethics and the values and the approaches that or the outcomes that their data would yield, I think more people would be willing to share their data. And the question for me is more about control of this data. Do people give this data willingly for the purposes that it is being used for? And that really is the key for me. I think we are not going to run into problems of no data, because what will happen is that it's an economy-driven system. If we have enough protections in place where people can refuse data use, I think we will start to see a data economy where companies will start paying people to get their data. But we are not there yet.
Thank you. Mauricia, go ahead.
Yeah, I would echo that and say it's not a zero-sum game. Some protection just means you can't go around mining, exploiting people's data willy-nilly. And overall, it just means that the longer arc is trust in how these systems work and increase societal acceptance. And we saw this with the European data protection regime, which kicked in 2018. I mean, companies adjusted. They're still doing business in the EU. Yes, it was an adjustment period for them to make sure they were complying with these provisions, which included something that looks like a prohibition of automated data processing, but really it's not a prohibition. It just lists a couple of specific scenarios in which you're allowed to process personal data. And we've survived. The world is still running. AI is in fact thriving. So I would think that this kind of rhetoric of protection or innovation is something we need to move beyond.
And if I can jump in, I just wanted to add to that I think that the idea that kind of rigorous debate and critique and extensive review is bad for innovation. I think that's just flat out wrong. I mean, we see that with science a lot. I mean, rigorous debate and the iteration, an iterative mode of development leads to better innovation. And what we're certainly seeing is huge financial and human cost as a result of lack of adequate protections currently. If you think about the amount of time and energy that people have to spend, and emotional exhaustion that people have to spend after a data breach to recorrect or redress, or after a negative effect. I think that it's clear that we need better protections, and that those things actually lead to better outcomes.
Thank you.
One final thing is also that it depends on what the thing is being built to do, right? So we could be doing different things. So you wouldn't, I mean, Wendy Chun argues that we should be building systems that expose us to more diverse viewpoints instead of kind of standardized and homogenized echo and filter chambers online, right? And so we could be doing different kinds of things with our data systems. We could be mining collective intelligence and trying to collectively make decisions about what we want in terms of like our public services, right? That's it. And nobody would need to know whether or not I have diabetes in order to do that, right? Like, so that would lead to a different kind of data ecosystem.
Thank you. From Lorraine, thanks for the great event. How might these issues relate to Anglophone Quebecers who are a linguistic minority? Are there particular concerns about AI amongst minorities? And I'll leave that to anyone in the group.
I'll take an initial stab, but this is by no means the complete view, even in my experience. Anytime you start talking about a small group, identity becomes a really, really key concern. If you only have data from 10,000 people, you're going to be able to identify the individuals in no time at all. So that would be a huge concern when you are dealing with data from minorities.
Maybe I can just add a point from the equality and non-discrimination standpoint, which is that anytime you have a minority, whichever marker you're dealing with, you should be looking at a different distribution of errors. So it could be that the system performs quite well overall, but it is more wrong more often about one particular subgroup. And when you're thinking about decisions like giving people bank loans or letting them out of jail, as some of these systems are used to assess the risk of recidivism, we know from experience that they perform differently on different demographic subgroups. So it's not specific to the Quebec linguistic minority, but there is, this kind of general issue with any statistics-based models where it doesn't have the same information about different groups. It's going to perform differently, and there are going to be equity problems there.
Thank you. Question from Varen Touray from Agape. We see many benefits to having AI. However, we also see the use of AI for the wrong, such as using AI to fraud seniors by automated voices of their children asking for money. How will we control this negative use of AI? And any of our panelists want to address this?
I'll again take a first stab, but I'll say that really the key issue here is what Marussia pointed out earlier, is that we have existing laws that we can apply to the new developments. We don't always have to go and find new laws to fight new technological developments. The principles that we have in place already do take care of these situations. Do they protect us? No. But then we are also not protected from someone shooting into our home, but we have a law to take care of something like that, right? We are not protected from someone withdrawing money from our bank, but we have a law to protect against that. So I think existing laws should be used to the extent possible. But beyond that, yes, we do need to have discussions about what are acceptable uses, and development of new laws certainly becomes relevant at some point. But we are not as helpless as we think we are.
Anyone else, Joanna?
Yeah, what we've seen happen, one of the things so we've been looking at canceled systems, so where and how, people have been stopping the use of particular kinds of systems. And one of the things that we've seen in some places is really effective community mobilization. So if there's a type of practice that is occurring, one of the things that community members have been doing has been reaching out to those in positions of authority, like privacy commissioners or inspector generals, or people who have the ability to do kind of detailed investigative work and audits, which can then lead to some companies stopping their practices. So for example, as a result of privacy commissioners coming together to investigate Clearview AI preemptively decided to stop providing their services. They said they did to police in Canada. for the kinds of practices that were under concern. And so similar things could happen here, right? I mean, I do think, I take the point about existing laws, but I also think there needs to be much more done in terms of kind of preemptive review investigation. And we need to ensure that we have the bodies that are capable of doing that work and responding quite quickly, because with these systems, the way that they're implemented, people often don't know that they're being negatively affected until after harm has already occurred. And that's a huge problem. And they're being implemented without a requirement to check for the kind of things that Marisa was talking about. So the way in which they could be discriminatory, right? And so there needs to be a means for people to seek redress if they are experiencing something negatively. And we need to know how these systems are being used more broadly.
So again, we have a point from Ruth. We may have laws, but to whom do we approach? And the other issue is how are these laws and implemented? But I want to get back to a question that was asked much earlier. I'm trying to scroll through things and bunch questions together. It's a daunting task, but trying to manage. There's a question for Nelson on how AI can improve our mental health. You mentioned this, but one of our, someone from Seniors Action Quebec wants to know how it can improve our mental health. Can it? And how can this be done? I've used some chats, and I have to say that I find my mental health suffers when I use some of the chat bots that are in place. I feel like I'm in the latest technological version of voicemail hell that is meant to actually make sure I never get an answer, but that I'm in an infinite loop with an AI machine where they're avoiding actually getting me to talk to a human subject. But that's another issue. How can AI be good for our mental health, Nelson?
So that's kind of a double-edged sword we do with AI, right? And technology, and how we're constantly bombarded with it. But you know, I think depends what your purpose is. And I've seen AI. Actually, that's not AI, sorry. But you know, a lot of tools are designed around understanding what the person's conditions are and then how they can support their decision making. Not so much treat them, but provide them with the right resources to make a decision about their care. So coming back to our the example I gave in my lecture, or not lecture, sorry, in my presentation, you know, we're designing a dashboard, and you know, it's not just throwing. The original intention of it was just to give people their data, but now we're engaging the patients to understand, well, how might we go about designing this in a way that's meaningful for you, that tells you a story about what your recovery is, and how might you approach continual improvement in your journey. So that's kind of one way we go about it. And then yeah, I mean, it really depends on, I guess, who the user is and what their needs are. I don't think it's going, like I said earlier, it's not going to be for everybody, but you know, we try to capture as much of those needs as possible, and you know, try our best with it. And then we always talked about this iterative process. We're not going to get it with one shot. We got to keep a iterative mindset and continue to develop.
Thank you. Fred asked Joanna Redden, but any of our panelists interested in these questions can also answer. What is lawful enforcement using AI to train or to investigate?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I posted a couple of resources in the chat to that because some people are doing great work in this area. So the Law Commission of Ontario and then Citizen Lab, Kate Robertson and her team looked at police uses of AI and automated systems. And so those are great resources to look at. And we're putting together a register of the way that we hope to have done in the next month. It's been a couple of years in the making of where and how government agencies are making use of AI and automated decision-making systems. And I guess this isn't an answer, but it's really hard to find this out, right? That there have been calls all around the world for governments to publish registers of where and how they use AI and automated decision-making systems. Our government promised to, but they haven't done it yet. And it's also, even if they do provide a federal register, there should also be provincial and municipal registers, right? We don't have those either. Our research suggests some people are looking at developing these, which is important, but it's not happening quick enough. Yeah, so where and how these, I mean, I did a brief look because I saw the question earlier. We know that just those in the area of justice are using AI to predict what cases are likely to be successful or not. So that informs their decisions about which cases to take to trial. We know that there are systems being used to risk assess people. We know that systems are being used like automatic license plate recognition systems. There are uses of facial recognition technologies in different areas. And those reports give you a really good overview of different kinds of applications, specifically in Canada too, which I think is important.
One area that's private that I know it isn't addressing there that I saw a presentation on in the Socio-German Technology Conference recently is also how, and it relates to age, is how algorithms are also affecting the banking industry in terms of decisions in later life about getting loans. But that's a whole other can of worms. Marussia.
I want to point out that the current AI bill, the federal bill, does not cover government use, and that has been criticized by some people because they have the power to do it. They've decided to construct it to base it on a constitutional power that's only about commerce, but that is an editorial decision. So there's a loophole there. And if I may, I also wanted to come back to an earlier question, Kim, that was asked by, I believe, Ruth, about, what are the laws, but mostly how do we implement them? And that is another shortcoming, perhaps, of this bill. As I said, the fox is guarding the hen house here. So companies themselves are assessing whether they're high risk or not. So if we're talking about the example of the synthetic voice frauding people, this is a really big problem because now we're entering the era of generative AIs, and a lot of these systems are called general purpose. So they're really broad system with really broad capabilities. And when a company like OpenAI, for instance, puts them on the market, they can be used for great purposes. You can synthesize someone's voice to make a funny, remake of a Taylor Swift song, but you can also impersonate somebody's grandson or granddaughter or grandchild. And so when you're imposing obligations on these companies upstream to decide whether their system will be of high impact or not, they may not be in a position to think about every potentially problematic use case. So there's a kind of responsibility gap there where they can wash their hands, but it doesn't mean people aren't impacted on the receiving end of things. And so one thing that we need is a better kind of retroaction or feedback loop for people to say, hey, your system is being used in ways that are harming, impacting me in this way. And so you need to be thinking about this moving forward to avoid those uses.
Thank you. I think we've covered most of the questions. There was one
There's
here.
one that just came in, Kim, from Lina Bushel, and I think most people would be very interested. It was referred to earlier, and it would be a protection that perhaps we can incorporate.
Go ahead. Didn't see it.
You did.
So I'll jump in, Kim. I'll back you up. So I think this it's a good bookend because I think what people are trying to figure out is it's the balance between how do you protect your data, and yet the world is moving forward with AI. So one question that came up is the pros and cons of using a VPN and other tools, if you will, tech tools to protect your data, if you have any input on that.
Go ahead.
This sounds like a general technology question. And again, I don't know that I have an authoritative answer, but I have follow-up questions. When I hear anything being pitched as a general purpose solution, I tend to be very, very skeptical of that. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, using VPNs was highly recommended for people who were accessing the internet or websites in cafes, in airports, in public locations, on public Wi-Fi networks. That was because a lot of web traffic was unencrypted. Things have changed in the last 10 years. Now, most websites have encrypted their traffic. So these days, when someone says, I want to use VPN, my first question is, what is the problem that you are trying to solve? If it is encryption of your data, most websites already encrypt your data. So that's kind of a lost cause because you're not gaining anything in the process. If you are trying to protect data sent by certain applications, app stores make sure that a lot of the data, at least, is advertised as encrypted. Most applications take data encryption seriously only because they want competitive advantage. They don't want other people seeing your data. They only want them seeing your data, right? So they have a vested interest in encrypting the traffic. If you're trying to protect your location, the question is, who are you trying to protect it from? Yes, you can do a VPN, and maybe you can protect it from the end website that's getting your data, perhaps. But the first place that your traffic is going to hit is the router that you are connecting to, or it's going to hit your cell phone provider. They know your location. So what is the problem you are trying to solve is what I would ask to anyone who's proposing using a VPN today.
Okay. So we have suggestions that VPNs may be helpful, but in other instances, they do cost extra money, and they may not, in fact, be providing the protection that you think you might be getting from them as well, is what I think I'm hearing. As this topic continues to develop, and again, all of these things are ongoing targets because this technology is changing very rapidly. And as you can see, as researchers who are devoting their time to all of this from the multiple perspectives from which they work, we're having a hard time keeping up. But we're doing our very best to try and do that. And we'll also do our very best to try and provide you with resources connected to this session that might be helpful for people. We also don't want to offer false hopes and promises to anybody and say, we have the answers here, because we're still, like all of you, trying to figure out what's going on. And as everybody has mentioned here, a lot of this information is black boxed. So it's sometimes very difficult to find things out. I'm also heartened here, not just one of the questions that came up is, will AI be uncontrollable? And I think what everybody has said here, that it's only as uncontrollable as we also give control to it and to those who are making these decisions, and that there are things that citizens can do from Nelson's position of get involved in co-design. Let's think about needs in a different way. Let's try and develop systems that are based on the actual needs of users, that have a justice mandate and are inclusive, that are thinking about how they can be used to better systems and alleviate the burdens of caregivers and workers rather than taking away employment and jobs, to the work of Unmil, who's trying to unpack and provided this long history, but yet also an understanding of what the current situation is in terms of these systems, to the work of Joanna and Marussia, who are keeping track of both laws and information systems. So again, this was meant to be an opening to a conversation that, as you could hear from the positions here, is extremely complex, so that if all of you don't have a handle on it, there's a reason for that. It's a lot of work to keep up. And we're all doing our very best to try and do that, but also thank all of you for listening to academics and scholars doing their very best to translate some difficult research and language into a more hopefully publicly accessible form and format. And we'll do our very best to try and keep working with Ruth and all of you. And any suggestions for future topics that we can organize are also very, very welcome. So with that, I'd like to thank our guest speakers and to Seniors Action Quebec and to our sponsors. We're way beyond time, of course. Ruth.
Thank you, Kim, very much. And I appreciate everybody staying with us and learning so much about this very important topic. And as Kim said, this is the beginning to a long dialogue. The presenters, thank you. It was excellent. I've learned a lot. You've raised a lot of questions, some concerns too. and no doubt we'll be watching it, and it's going to be something that we have to be involved with. I thank all the wellness centers, all the people throughout the regions of Quebec for coming. And you will be getting a link with a copy of the recording in approximately a week. And there will also be an attachment, which will be an evaluation, a survey. Take you about 3 minutes to fill it out. We appreciate everybody doing so. Brendan has just put the link up on the chat box. If you're able to do it quickly, that's great. If not, we're right at the wire. So do watch for it. It's important to have that information that you submit back to us for our funders. Wish everybody a great week and a good day. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.